do this reading every day. I think if you have a job that doesn't fulfill you, it's particularly useful exercise to do to set the stage or to apply a framework such that your unpreferred occupation is a spiritual practice. This, I mentioned before, Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss, and then later, I believe he tried to correct that to follow your blisters, because people are using it for spiritual bypass and magical thinking. And I'm not against magical thinking, except for myself. I don't feel like that's the path for me. I think it's more about using magic to inform other kinds of thinking, so to speak. In any case, so we have from Jung, call, trial, return, and bardo. And the question I asked the cards was, today, what informs me about reciprocation, higher obligation, and inspiration? And I'll explain what those terms mean if you're unfamiliar with my work. The higher thoughts per minute, TPM, means we spin faster around this circle. So we may only realize a failure to reciprocate, that is, to appreciate not knowing. Appreciate that God is asleep inside us. Appreciate that we've lost the beautiful, wonderful non-duality. How can we appreciate that? Well, typically we don't appreciate it. We can't even accept it. But if we could appreciate it, then we would start things off on the right foot. We would humbly accept not knowing what you think. And that's what we call reciprocation. We reciprocate the act of losing our unity with God. We reciprocate the freshness of this moment by appreciating, or at least accepting, not knowing. 99% of the time, if not more, we will find that we think we know, or that we need to know. And whether we think we know, positively or negatively, we're attached. If we think we need to know, we're attached. The only path of those four options, and you may know my four-way grid talks, is to appreciate not knowing. To consider we can't know. We don't even know who we are. As soon as we think we know who we are, as soon as we think we know what needs to happen, as soon as we think we know if we're good or bad, or others are good or bad, or situations good or bad, or work is good or bad, we are attached. So that's how we start things off in the spring. We appreciate not knowing. And you can think of a seed not knowing if it's going to grow. You can think of a couple not knowing if they're going to have a baby. A couple could be animals too. I'm just saying, this uncertainty about new beginnings and appreciating the mystery, not knowing. But typically we don't do that. So then we enter the trial, day, summer, and then we have an obligation other than making this moment about this moment, MTM, ATM. Making this moment about this moment is our obligation, a friendly obligation, a positive adaptive child obligation. But we typically choose a lower obligation, like our self-image, even our safety, our wealth, our gratification of body. Completely natural, even biological, but because making this moment about this moment could lead to starvation. You're so blissed out in the present, in a state of samadhi, that you don't take care of making sure you're fed, making sure you've got rent. The obligations, they're lower, but they're not bad, they're just lower. So making this moment about this moment is our highest obligation, and we typically, 99%, if not more, fail in that. And our thoughts per minute, our TPM, is going faster and faster, so we may not even realize we failed to reciprocate, and we chose a lower obligation. Not until we realize that do we have a chance for finding the inspiration of unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional positive self-regard. This is what a therapist is most useful for, not acting as a coach to solve problems, to help us figure out these lower obligations and how to achieve them, or to help us with knowing. It's actually the opposite of what you typically think a coach would do. It's about the inspiration of unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional positive self-regard. And so what we're seeking to do in the return, in the dusk, in the sunset, in the fall, is prepare ourselves for the return to the bardo. And if we have unconditional self-acceptance in that final phase, and you can do this with a slight smile during meditation, then you're more likely to appreciate not knowing. If you don't have unconditional self-acceptance, if you have conditional self-acceptance or no self-acceptance, you don't appreciate not knowing. You can't even accept not knowing. You need to know what you think you do know. And how are you going to make this moment about this moment unless you have unconditional self-acceptance? Because if you don't have unconditional self-acceptance, then this moment is about getting conditional self-acceptance. So then the bardo night winter, we don't pull a card for that, and we don't talk about that. It's beyond time, beyond space. It's the container. It's the formless. You can call it God. Okay, so we got inverted Five of Pentacles, and you'll notice I rarely get inverted cards. I'm cautious about not allowing them to be inverted, but it happens, which is good, because then it shows me that, I'll talk about what that shows, but this card is typically around poverty and generosity towards those who are less fortunate. It relates to Sphere 5 and the Tree of Life. Obligation, I corrected the deck when I saw it was inverted. What is the obligation other than making this moment about this moment? We'll talk about the Moon card. And then finally, the new beginnings, starting out again with Two of Wands. Okay, so just a couple of things to say if you haven't listened to my other talks. The challenge is to appreciate or at least accept not knowing. We can use the tarot not to remove confusion, but to explore what might be helpful for us to know, to accept and appreciate not knowing, right? Typically the tarot is used to remove confusion. For me, this is using it for the lower obligation, that is advancing self-image, creating safety, wealth, and physical pleasure, and predicting what's going to happen. And I suggest that it should be used for a higher purpose, which is to make this moment about this moment, and see what can support us in that in the beginning, at the call, in terms of accepting not knowing, and at the end, in terms of unconditional self-acceptance. If you don't use the tarot for that, in my opinion, it's most likely you're using it for a lower obligation related to Maya and time, space, image, past, future. So, but if we have appreciation of not knowing, the call, then with that we can bring making this moment about this moment in the trial, and whether we succeed or fail in that mission, or we can call it the friendly obligation, we can bring unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional positive self-regard. Without reciprocation, using it to humbly appreciate not knowing means we take on a mission and obligation other than making this moment about this moment. So we need the inspiration of unconditional self-acceptance for the next time around the circle. Again, if the thoughts per minute is high, this can be challenging. And I am talking quickly just to try to get this into a condensed form because people aren't patient these days. Anyway, if our thoughts per minute is high, the wheel spins, so we need to pay attention, and we're going to see some negative adaptive child, tamasic energy, sphere 8, or negative free child, rajasic energy, sphere 7. So sphere 8 is about the group and aligned with limitation and constriction. Sphere 7 is aligned with purpose and the individual. So both of these sides are demanding or seeking to justify and defend, unless it's positive. You can be positive free child and positive adaptive child. Then you're aligned with those sides of the tree, and it's not about demanding or seeking to defend and justify. It's just about being in a flow state and handing off from positive free child to positive adaptive child seamlessly and easily, and often they can be working together. So, but usually they're not working together. So we confess that we got hijacked by negative free child, rajasic energy, negative adaptive child, tamasic energy, and then we repent using ideal parental figure and sattvic energy, that's sphere 6, and we're using unconditional self-acceptance and to humbly appreciate not knowing, to support making this moment about this moment. Our aim is to fulfill our obligation and our mission, friendly obligation, friendly mission, to make this moment about this moment. We usually fail, and so if we fail to allow or appreciate not knowing, we're going to fail at making this moment about this moment, most likely. So beginner's mind is rejected, and we likely identify as the author of a thought and take on a lower mission obligation other than making this moment about this moment. And we're looking for conditional self-love, and so if possible we want to summon unconditional self-acceptance and unconditional positive self-regard. Okay, so here's the Tree of Life. We've tweaked the language a little bit. And pull of the sphere 8 means we're responding to negative feelings such as anger, fear, and regret, the lack of acceptance, so we seek to suppress them. So if you see an inverted Five of Pentacles, it's probably because you can't be generous towards others because you're feeling too limited, too much cultural conformity, you feel too obligated, and it's a lower obligation. It's not the higher obligation of making this moment about this moment, which is what you'd find at sphere 6 and sphere 1. The mind wants to avoid suffering, so it urges you to deny the existence of negative feelings or judge yourself for having them. Again, you're going to have inverted Pentacles, Five of Pentacles, and non-charitable behavior because your mind is so busy trying to deny any negative feelings. You may even try to appear like you're charitable. by doing charitable work, or presenting yourself as charitable, or boasting about your charitable actions. Or you may judge yourself for not having any charitable impulse, or not as enough charitable impulse. So delusion isn't why we're here, I would say. It's putting out the delusion, but that's not why we're here. And even if that's incorrect, the suppressed thoughts don't want to be ignored. So there's going to be destructive images, conflictual images, feelings, thoughts, words, especially at night and dreams. There can be outbursts of compulsive behavior, blow off steam and distract. And so again, you're going to have not a desire to be charitable because you're bottling up and then expressing these rebellious feelings. In other words, the pull of sphere 7 and free child and Rajasic energy. Now you can ask, why did I feel uncomfortable when such and such happened? Or why did I engage in that behavior? And does this remind me of something in my past? That's just a way to kind of bring the ideal parental figure. If you have unconditional self-acceptance, or at least a little bit of that, you're more likely to ask these questions and be honest with your answers. Okay, so Five of Pentacles points to this justice and limitation. If it's inverted, then we really want to focus on, we have a desire to focus on our own purpose, our own creativity, our own originality, something other than what the job is demanding that we do. The Moon card, it links spheres 5 and 6, so it's moving us to out of this excessive justice and limitation and into balance. Because if we stay at excessive justice and limitation, of course the Five of Pentacles is going to be inverted. We're not going to be as kind and merciful as we can because we're too busy focused on the purpose of our self-image, making up for past trauma, and trying to secure a future where we're going to be happier. So we're focused on our individual needs, not being charitable to others. And you can see this upward trajectory to the upper right, with the final card being the Two of Wands, which is often spoken about as new beginnings. The person's looking out there. And this is the new beginning of the universe, moving from infinity, Ein Sof, eternity, beyond time and space, God, bardo, into wisdom, creativity. And what is wisdom? Well, wisdom is not from polarization. We can say wisdom is not from identifying with negative free child or negative adaptive child. That brings imbalance. So wisdom comes from the two sides of the tree, the two wands in this picture, and us in the middle. And the sphere that he's holding, look at the direction he's holding it in. He's holding sphere 1 in his hand. That's where wisdom comes from, not from something you read in a book. It comes in the moment. And it comes when you have unconditional self-acceptance. You appreciate not knowing. You can't have wisdom if you don't appreciate not knowing, or at least accept not knowing, right? Because you're not open. And lastly, you can't make this moment about this moment unless you have appreciating or accepting not knowing and unconditional self-acceptance. But if you have those and you're making this moment about this moment, wisdom is channeled through you. It's not something you're generating yourself. The mind will suppress unpleasant emotions, predict them, seek to explain them, find someone or something to blame, often you. That's just what the mind does, especially when you have a high TPM, you're not making this moment about this moment, you can't appreciate not knowing, and you don't have unconditional self-acceptance, right? Then it's going to just do the best it can, which is to suppress, seek to explain, find blame. Mind makes and judges plans to remove unpleasant emotions, so it wants to plan, and then that plan is going to come from one polarity or the other, negative free child, negative adaptive child, tamas or rajas, and then the other side is going to judge that, try to tear it down. That's not really balance, that's just a ping pong ball. That's most of our lives, most of the time. So the mind doesn't often consider just being with the emotions, passion, with pain. It's just not something it sees as a reason to do that. And if we don't get it modeled by our parents, we're going to have to do some work to try to bring that out. A therapist can be with those emotions and model for it for us. By practicing breathe and smile, so this is meditation, you may find the capacity to sit still and do nothing other than observe emotions, fear, anger, shame, guilt, regret, and sadness. If you see any fear, desire, criticism, worry, plans, predicting, it suggests that you have pre-existing internal self-rejection or unconditional self-acceptance. That's a signal or sign that you have some pre-existing internal self-rejection or conditional self-acceptance, right? So you have that, and you go to the tarot to figure out, how do I manage Maya to get me removal of fear, getting what I desire, avoiding the criticism, allaying my worries, making plans, and predicting. But it's not about that, right? So if the FDC WPP is happening, it's an invitation for unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional positive self-regard, so that you can find to humbly accept not knowing and to make this moment about this moment, which is our friendly obligation. So if we're not reading the cards for that purpose, we're choosing a lower obligation, and we're just setting ourselves up for attachment. Again, my 4-quadrant chart, and there'll be a recurrence of the FDC WPP because you're just dealing with the tops of the weeds, not the roots. So FDC WPP suggests, again, this is pre-existing internal self-rejection, conditional self-acceptance. We know this because those who have unconditional self-acceptance, USA, unconditional positive self-regard, they're less prone to be troubled by their fear, desire, criticism, worry, plans, and predicting. So if we see these things as the sign or the signal that there's a pre-existing self-rejection or conditional self-acceptance, it's not an invitation for a therapist or a person reading a tarot card to start problem solving, but rather it's a chance for modeling unconditional positive regard despite the fear, desire, worry, plans, and predicting. So thoughts will come, attack, praise, the past, the thoughts, the actions. And this is all the polarization. It may insist there is or isn't a chance for redemption and salvation. Believing those thoughts can drive one to accomplish or prove something, or to suppress a desire for accomplishing and proving. And again, it can lead to inverted Five of Pentacles. With beginner's mind, to humbly accept not knowing, we reply with unconditional self-acceptance. So we can go into Jung, we can go into Adler, we can go into Freud. These fit into the vows, and we're not going to talk about that now because this and it goes into the Enneagram. This talk has gone too far, but feel free to reach out to me about that. And then this is what we can do with relationship to moving ourselves along. Okay, I think we're going to stop right there.